This is Kent Lassman of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He serves as their president and CEO. How do you explain your institute to other people?
Well, at CEI, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, we're focused on economic regulation. So primarily things that come out of the federal government from the bureaus and agencies, the departments, the regulations, the rules that tell us how to get along and how to interact and how to run our businesses.
How does regulation determine all of that, and particularly how the federal government operates?
Well, there's two questions there. There's the rules that the agencies create for how businesses do their job, do their work, how they interact with customers, what they're allowed to purchase, how they sell, how they advertise, where they can locate their facilities or not locate. All of that is the regulation that is created here in Washington and affects the rest of America. There's also very important regulation, the process. How do we go about creating those rules? How do we change them? How do we adjudicate when there's a conflict? So if a Bureau of Land Management at the Department of Interior says you're not allowed to do such and such on your land, and you disagree, you think that that's not a problem, how do you resolve that conflict? Those procedural norms are also created through regulation. And we study and make proposals on both sides of that equation.
You've had, in the Biden administration, I imagine you keep track of the rate of regulation that administration created. How would you compare that to what you're seeing, at least in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration?
The first few weeks, I think we're 22 days into an administration, a 4-year administration. The first few weeks here, we are watching what we see every 4 years, or at least every time there's a changeover from one president to another, which is to say there's a pause. Every time there's a new team, they come into town, they issue an announcement to the agency heads, and they say, put a freeze on the rules that you're creating. Give us a chance to get our arms around what's happening, what's moving through the system. Overall, when we look at the last 4 years, there was a great degree of growth in the rate of new regulation. Last year, we had 26 new regulations for every law passed by Congress. Previously, that sort of index had been as low as 19. So when we're looking at 100,000 pages of regulation coming through the system, and then asking the American people to know it, to understand how it affects their day-to-day lives, my sense is that's too much. And we have too many regulators doing too many things, instructing us how to live our lives in too many ways.
To that end, I suppose people look at the topic of regulation and feel it as amorphous. Give an example of how a regulation impacts directly to someone's life.
So Congress has established a goal for connectivity to the internet, telecommunications. We have a series of programs across the federal government, about a dozen of them, to provide connectivity, access, subsidies, all sorts of different ways to increase Americans' access to the internet. Well, at the Federal Communications Commission, they have to not only manage the program, it's called the BEAD program is the principal one, but they have to set the rules for how you apply. Once you apply, how much you will receive. So there are schools and libraries across this country that are according to Congress, been granted the privilege of having subsidized service, and they need to then follow large manuals of rules about how to get that service. And on a day-to-day basis, we see schools hiring people to administer to the subsidy program or the grant program rather than hire people to teach or instruct children. That's the sort of thing where it doesn't take many steps to get from the objective of Congress all the way down to real-life effects in the cities and towns across America.
For that all being said, then, what's CEI's philosophy of how an administration should handle regulation?
Well, the top-level goal is simply to allow more people to live their life in their own way. And that means all regulation doesn't have to come from the government. We regulate every day through our purchasing power. You know, when you decide to subscribe or not subscribe. When I picked out a diner to go to this morning, did I go to the neighborhood coffee shop or did I come downtown and go to the coffee shop near where your offices are here. That's a form of regulation. There's other forms of regulation that include private standard setting. When it comes to the federal government, what we'd like to see are rules that are broadly, or what are called generally applicable. That is, there's not special carve-outs. We don't make the decisions about who gets what based on political considerations. We create one rule, a broad rule that applies to all, and it becomes easier to administer, lower costs for the administration, but also easier for people to understand. And when it's easier for them to understand, it's more predictable, they can make investment decisions better, and everything hums along much better.
A good discussion with Kent Lassman of Competitive Enterprise Institute. You can join in the conversation and ask your questions by calling the lines, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8002 or 8000 for Democrats, and 202-748-8002 for Independents. And text us your questions or comments at 202-748-8003. On your website, they have regulation on the agency level. The most recent posting said this: there were 29 final regulations issued last week, 28 the previous week, 306 final regulations so far in 2025. That's on pace for over 3,000 in this year. And then adding that there were, when it comes to 2024, 3,200 plus, over 3,000 in 2023, 3,100 in 2022. On the agency level, is that rate concerning at this point?
Absolutely. And what you're putting your finger on is we have not just this flow. Every year, more than 3,000 new regulations, 3,000 regulations to digest by the American people. But we also have a stock of regulation, all the regulation that's been built up basically for a little more than 100 years now. And one feature of our regulatory state is that it's much easier to create new regulation than it is to either amend or repeal an existing rule. And as a result, we just keep accumulating and accreting more and more of these obligations for people that all come with the force of law.
And so then when it comes to advising Congress on the amount of regulation or advising the White House on regulation, what conversations have you had with this Congress and its leadership, and what's been the response?
Well, the very first thing that we do is we've created an agenda for Congress, right? And it's available on our website. It's a pro-growth agenda. We took a look at 15 different categories of economic activity and regulation, and we made proposals for Congress using the following criteria. We asked ourselves not what would be ideal or perfect from our analysts' point of view, but what could possibly attract support from across the aisle. So we have 51 proposals here for Congress that we think should engender support from across the aisle, and each of which would do something positive for economic growth and for prosperity, and to help make America and our economy a little bit more dynamic.
We just heard from Capitol Hill this morning. Congress is, particularly on the Republican side and on the Senate side, trying to come up with a budget. In that budget creation process, is there space there to limit the amount of regulations that are involved?
Absolutely. And first and foremost, I say that this is not a joke, it's just axiomatic. Regulators will regulate. So fewer regulatory agencies with less legal authority would be a good thing. As I mentioned earlier, we have more than 460 rulemaking bodies. These are bureaus, offices, departments, agencies, and that is not the path toward a healthy economy. So the first thing they can do with their budget process is to look at the scope of all the different places, all the different ways that we regulate, and pull some of that back.
If then your concern is on the agency level as well, what do you make of the work of Elon Musk these days?
Well, that's not a short answer. There's something really interesting that I believe the president put his finger on with the distaste for the way our government operates. So the Doge activity, it started as a line in a speech in early September. It transformed itself into some sort of meme campaign for several months. And now it's at the very early stages, just a few weeks into some sort of operationalized program. And that operationalized program, what we can say about it is they're moving very quickly. It's not clear what standards and legal protections and whatnot apply. Those things are being sorted literally day by day. And I'm overall quite optimistic that that project, this Doge project of Elon Musk and others, is something that has done at least one very good thing. And it has captivated the attention on Capitol Hill, where the attention should be focused on how the government operates. The Constitution puts Congress in Article 1 for a reason. It is the primary organ of our government. And we're asking Congress to take more care and be more deliberative and to do a little bit more work organizing the nature of our federal government. And Doge has been a spotlight, if nothing else.
Would you say that the Congress should be doing the work that Doge is currently doing?
As a general rule, oversight is the responsibility of Congress. You know, their job is to pass laws that say what government does, and then make sure that the executive branch does those things. For a long time, we've had a very unhealthy relationship where Congress says, we're going to pass a law, empower an agency to do something, and then we're going to look away. We're not going to pay attention. And if something ever goes wrong, if there's ever a scandal, if a goal is not met, then we're going to blame the agency. And this sort of spotlight is stripping away that negative relationship that we've had in the past and allowing Congress to say, wait a minute, we actually don't understand how all these agencies operate.
Our guest website is CEI.org, and if you want to see what he referenced as far as the Free to Prosper effort that they have, the message they have towards Congress when it comes to regulation issues, you can find that on their website. Jason in Texas, Independent Line, you're up first for our guest, Kent Lassman of the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
Well, thank you for taking my call. The question I have is right now around the country, there's many software technical workers whose jobs are being outsourced to overseas, and you don't hear a whole lot being talked about that. That's a case where regulation can help the average worker. So it's talked about that it's America first. So how can we help our technical workers not lose our jobs?
I think the most important thing that can happen with a sector of the economy, a type of job that is undergoing rapid change, is to allow those people and those employees to have opportunities to get reestablished. So there's two basic methods. You can try to protect and hold on to something that is slipping away because it's moving, in this case, maybe certain tech jobs are moving overseas, or you can create an environment where for every job that goes overseas, we have 10 new ones created. And it's that latter approach, the dynamic approach, that is really most important. And it's not just for tech jobs. It's the same discussion that we have with steel tariffs. It's the same discussion that we have year over year when it comes to dynamic change.
Georgina in Miami, Florida, Republican line.
Yeah, hi, I'm a Democrat, actually.
Okay, well then I'm going to stop you there. We'll go on to Louise and ask you to call the line that best represents you. Independent line, North Carolina. Louise, hello.
Hey, good morning, Pedro. I appreciate you cutting people off when they're calling the wrong line because, you have your opportunity. Anyway, what I wanted to say was I think I like this Doge a lot, and what's the chances of us being able to keep this going? Because I really appreciate it. Me, retired from the government, I know exactly where we could cut a lot of waste, and I see it. And I know they have so much money they can spend before the fiscal year, and they have to use as much as they can to keep their budget high, and I really appreciate seeing this going on. And what's the chances it's going to stay? That's my question.
Okay, that's Louise.
Louise, thank you for that. I think you are tapped into something that both Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk talked about early in this process, which is they wanted help. They wanted insight from people working in these agencies and in these programs, because those are the people that know best how they operate and where they work well and where they fail to get the job done. What's going to be most important is not all the excitement about naming the problems and the spotlight effect that I described a few minutes ago. But in the coming months, to make this durable or to really make this keep going, as you said, we're going to see that there is a problem presented to Congress. And the problem is, will they take a vote that might imperil some portion of an agency that is favored at home? In order to tackle waste or duplication or problems across the board, they're going to have to probably take votes that also gore their own ox a little bit. And that sort of collective action problem is something that Congress has done before, but it's rare. And my hope is that all of the energy and activity in the past few weeks can really get them excited enough that they're willing to do something serious about the way our government operates.
You put the onus on Congress, but to what degree are you concerned that members of Congress, particularly Republicans, will say DOJ is doing it, let them take care of that?
They might say that. That would be irresponsible. Quite frankly, Congress is responsible for how the government is structured. Full stop. And if they don't want to take responsibility for that and write the law that either authorizes or does not authorize some of these programs, then our next available opportunity is to vote them out of office.
The president, in one of his early executive orders, said that for every regulation that's put into place in his administration, they're going to dismiss 10 of them. What challenges face the president on that front?
As I said, it is more difficult to remove a rule than it is to put one in place. What he's describing here is sort of an acceleration of something that worked quite well during the president's first term. He had a rule of thumb, if you will, not a regulation, that called for 2 regulations to come out for every new regulation created. And this 10-to-1 ratio, it is going to put a lot of pressure on agencies to look at that stock of regulations that they have, the accumulated mass of regulation from over the decades, and start aggressively repealing old rules.
From Andy, Democrats line for Kent Lassman. Go ahead. He's in Oregon.
Hi. Yeah, hi, Kent. I was curious about what the Competitive Enterprise Institute's position would be on, like, say, stop signs, speed limits, automotive restraints, and if they feel that American citizens have the right to self-regulate their driving habits.
Thank you, Andy. Generally, these sorts of health, welfare, and safety questions should be handled in our state capitals. So this, I don't think, is a question for the Department of Transportation or for the White House. It is something for the folks in Washington or in Oregon or in California to handle individually. And as a result, we do see we have seen different seatbelt laws over the years, different helmet laws for motorcycles, speed limits, and the like.
The 2 specialists at Brookings Institution recently put out a paper taking a look at regulations. And one of the points they make is this: regulations keep our food supply, automobiles, financial markets and institutions, pharmaceuticals and workplace safer, our environment cleaner, and our financial markets and instruments more transparent than they otherwise would be. That's because the market can, quote, fail in various ways. Private companies do not fully internalize the cost of activities, may impose on others. And without regulation, consumers may not be fully informed about the risk of products and services they buy. Private markets alone are likely to underinvest in so-called public goods. The larger question is, if you take away regulations, how do you ensure safety or the concerns that they have to the American public?
So any one of those we could tackle. It's probably too much to tackle all of them at once. But let's talk about food safety, right? This is groceries, restaurants, things of that nature. First and foremost, on the front line, we have something called reputational value, right? No grocery store wants to be responsible for selling bad eggs. It's bad for business, it's bad for their customers, and frankly, the people who run those grocery stores, they're good people too. They shop at those grocery stores. They don't want contaminated foods on the market. The relationship between the growers or producers and the shippers and the retailers of our food supply is something where there's a lot of interdependence, and at each step, every actor has an interest in high quality. It is absolutely the case that most states and our federal government, through the Congress, has said we ought to have some standard. We ought to have some standard for dairy, we ought to have some standard for eggs, etc. If that's the case, I think we can separate safety standards from the economic regulation of how do you ship, how do you sell, what information can you present. Do we need a regulation that says that eggs are large, extra large, AAA? All of those things, guided by the Department of Agriculture, I think can go by the wayside, because consumers and grocers can figure out how to best sell their eggs. We don't need a Department of Agriculture to sort all of that out, even if we have set a standard for safety.
Is it better than an industry to, in your mind, to self-police itself to make sure they're meeting these standards without some type of outside force looking in?
I think we get halfway there. The self-police, I want to focus on the policing, right? And no one operates, or no entity operates autonomously. And so as I was describing, the grocers, they're competing against other grocers. They're also competing against alternatives. We can buy our groceries in many places in this country online and have them delivered. So you don't even go to the grocery store. In addition, they're dealing with all of their vendors and suppliers. And then on the other side of the equation, they're dealing with all of their customers. And it doesn't take much for a handful of customers to say, wait a minute, I don't like the look of this. It smells bad. We're not going to shop there. And suddenly their business tanks. So it's not self-policing so much as policing within an ecosystem.
Let's hear from Jerry. Jerry's in Pennsylvania, Republican line. Go ahead. Jerry in Pennsylvania.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jerry. How come the Democrats are down Trump and Eli Musk for taking over the buildings where they found out all the people, Democrats, were cheating the people? The Democrats should be investigated themselves instead of investigating Eli Musk and Donald Trump.
Jerry in Pennsylvania.
I think the key word of our caller's question is about investigations. And what I would like to see, and I think is available to us, is to have Congress take a closer look at what these agencies do and how they fulfill the mandates that are given to them by law. It is really important that we don't have agencies setting their own course, deciding for themselves what to work on, what to prioritize, and coloring outside the lines of the statutes given to them by our bicameral system and presentment clause.
The Trump administration is focused in the last day or so on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. What's your opinion of the Bureau, particularly when it comes to regulatory efforts?
The long and short of it is I have something of an outsider view in that I don't think we need the CFPB. It ought to be shut down. Probably never should have been established. But here we are. So there's a couple steps that have been taken. The first was the interim administrator, similar to a past effort by an interim administrator, turned to the Federal Reserve and said, I do not need more money for the next quarter. The CFPB is insulated from our traditional accountability measures for spending in that they don't go to Congress for their appropriation. That means their checkbook is filled by simply sending a one-page letter to the Fed saying, I would like more money. They have a fund balance of more than $700 million, and so the interim administrator said, we don't need any money for next quarter. I think that's right and proper, and it probably could be extended. The big point is that the CFPB was set up to do specialized regulation, consumer finance products and services. These are credit cards and loans and other consumer finance activity. My sense is that the American people are quite smart, and we don't need special regulation on a sectoral basis any more than we need special regulation to tell us that we ought to look for a job that suits our interests, or that we ought to educate our children, or that we ought to buy eggs that are not fouled by contamination. These are the sorts of things that people can sort out for themselves. We can enlist and go to war. We can buy a house. Certainly we can decide whether or not to get a credit card.
One of those driving forces was the Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren. She took to X yesterday about the attention being paid to the CFPB and gave her defense of it. I want to play you a little bit of what she had to say and get your response to it.
If they succeed, CEOs and Wall Street will once again be free to trick, trap, and cheat you. The CFPB is the little agency working to shut down scams and fraud on payment apps like Zelle and PayPal and Cash App. It's the agency that steps in when the big bank trips up and repossesses your car. It's the agency that's working to cut those crazy fees that banks and credit card companies bury down in the fine print, and then you got to pay for them. Already, this little agency has forced giant banks and corporations to give back more than $21 billion directly to families they cheated. And that includes hundreds of millions of dollars back for veterans who got cheated by predatory lenders. So why are these two guys trying to gut the CFPB? Not rocket science. Trump campaigned on helping working people, but now that he's in charge, this is the payoff to the rich guys who invested in his campaign and who want to cheat families and not have anybody around to stop them. Yeah, it's another scam.
So Kent Lassman, that's her assessment. What do you think?
Well, I think Senator Warren has great instinct. She wants to help people, but she's got this entirely backward. The CFPB that she has just described, scams, problems with fraud, all of these things are already illegal. We already have recourse. In fact, consumer protection in every single state nests within the Attorney General's office, and most have a consumer advocate that takes up this sort of issue. And I tell you, they do it. They do it over and over again. We don't need a special federal agency spending hundreds of millions of dollars per quarter in order to do the job that's already being done close to where the problem happens. So when it arises, people turn to their state government and they say, look, I was defrauded. Somebody broke the law. And that gets reconciled. The notion that this is just a payoff for corporate CEOs or something of the sort, I think is a little bit beneath her, in the sense that she's attacking people and motives rather than really looking at the outcomes of the agency and the way it is structured and the way it fits, or in my view, mostly does not fit within our constitutional order. It was by design. In her own words and her testimony in 2009, subsequently as a senator, it was designed to be insulated from politics. And as nice as that sounds, it's actually opposite of what we want. We want our agencies accountable to the political actors, the political bodies in our constitutional order, including Congress.
Let's hear from Jeannie. Jeannie is in Arizona for our guest. Jeannie, thanks for waiting on our independent line. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to know what what they investigate regarding the lies that are spewed by some of the news stations, by the online communications that people go to, like Twitter and whatever. And basically, are they looking into that at all, where they should hold them responsible, because you hear so many people exaggerating and repeating the lies. Also, as an aside, the gentleman, Kent Lassman, stated that most people are able to judge for themselves about what's good and not. And that is, obviously, he hasn't been around a lot of people that are poor or that are working two jobs that don't even have the time to study it. They just end up paying the amounts stated. I mean, it takes a lot to fight anything, and that's a fact.
Okay, Jeannie in Arizona, thank you.
Jeannie, fortunately or unfortunately, lying is not illegal. Traditionally, what we have said, a little phrase that comes from the Supreme Court actually, is that the response to bad speech or lies or innuendo of this sort is more speech that we want more people out there correcting the record. I think that's true in our current environment. That probably doesn't go far enough. We also need to ask ourselves to be better consumers of information, to improve the quality of what we expect from where we turn to for news and sourcing. When it comes to, just quickly address the last point that Jeannie made, when it comes to the difficulty of working your way through, for example, some of the financial service offers that perhaps she was referring to what Senator Warren talks about, it is absolutely the case that the reason when you go to buy a car or an automobile, there are dozens of pages in a form with very small print is because of the regulation. It's not the other way around, right? The regulation doesn't protect us from all that. It causes all of that. And the ability to go to a bank or go to a credit provider and say, this is what I'm willing to pay for such and such service, I think is well within everyone's means.
Leo joins us. He's in South Carolina, Democrats line. You're next up.
Thank you for taking my call. My question is, why are we totally relying on a person that hadn't been vetted and about the issues that they are investigating, and all this downloading to their servers of all of our vital items from our files? Also, why aren't the IG? Why didn't they keep the IG? Because the IG has that overall responsibility to make sure that things are done correctly. Another thing is, this guy that they got doing this, he invested $270+ million into the presidency. It looks bad. It may not be. He may not have bad intention, but we should have, I think, the Congress have oversight responsibility. They should be a part of the team. They shouldn't have a team that's doing this. Everything should be above board. What's being done in the dark doesn't end up good. I don't think the overall intent is good here because it's being done in the dark, and it's being done without interaction between the agencies, between the Congress and the executive branch. These things are already law. These institutions have been in place, and they need to be investigated.
Got the point, Leo. Got the point, Leo. Thank you.
I think Leo's spot on about perhaps the most important thing that is happening right now, and that is an overall increase from all different vectors of transparency, that we're better understanding and we're developing new information about the way our government operates. To the question about putting people in sensitive positions or vetting or whatnot, that's simply something that I can't speak to. I know the president has signed some 75 proclamations, orders, executive orders in the last 3 weeks. There are now, at least, the New York Times is reporting, 40 lawsuits about those executive actions. Those lawsuits, the very first thing that they do is find facts. And that's really important. It's difficult for us to be patient, to understand, who's going in where and getting what information with what sort of vetting or whatnot, but it's something that we have to rely on a system of laws, and a system of institutions of liberty, like an independent judiciary, rather than rely on the word of one or another politician.
Barbara in Georgia, Republican line. We're running a little short on time, so jump in with your question or comment, please.
Okay, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to back up just a little bit real quick. So Mr. Lassman, he said that Congress should really investigate Musk and the group that are going through right now trying to find waste in our spending. But my understanding is they have all passed the background that is required and been hired as federal employees. So why would it be different for them to be investigated versus every single federal employee that's hired to be investigated? And the fact that they're dealing with our money, we've had federal employees dealing with money.
Barbara, thank you.
Barbara, I think I must have miscommunicated. What I meant to get across to you was that it's very important for Congress to look at the behavior, the programs, and the operations of the regulatory agencies, to the specific activity of Doge and Elon Musk. I don't really have any information. I don't have facts about whether these people have been vetted or cleared or not. That's something that is still being determined.
We have about a minute left, but I did want to ask you about in the regulatory world. I don't know if it fits exactly, but the president says new tariffs are coming on aluminum and steel and maybe others. What do you think of that idea?
Bad idea. Pedro, thank you for asking. Look, the taxing authority rests very clearly in Article 1 of the Constitution. Even by proponents, the president's team and the president himself, of these new tariffs, they say this is in order to raise revenue. We want to do this so that we can have more flexibility with the tax code. That makes it a tax. The murky authority that has been delegated from Congress to the president to sometimes, in certain circumstances, to act unilaterally on trade and tariffs is something that should be clarified and pulled all the way back to Congress. This is something that's good regardless of who's in charge of the White House, and Congress should jealously guard that prerogative.
You can see the work of CEI, or the Competitive Enterprise Institute, at CEI.org. Kent Lassman serving as the president and CEO. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much.